Guys, we've got more analysis trickling out. We've got storylines. We've got narratives developing, possibly Michigan and TCU being disrespected by the College Football Playoff Committee, maybe Clemson and LSU being overrated. I wanted to do a deep dive on some of these teams' schedules and talk about how I think the committee came to their decision in their initial release of the top 25 rankings for 2022 last night. The first thing I wanted to talk about, Tennessee number 1 over Ohio State. It's respectable, it's understandable. Ohio State beats Tennessee in all the major metrics, but Tennessee does have a better schedule. They've got a way better win over Alabama than Ohio State does, so Tennessee being number 1, it doesn't bother me. Ohio State number 2, Georgia number 3, I predicted that. There was really no other spot for Georgia to be ranked other than number 3 due to their weak strength of schedule along with their struggles against Kansas State and Missouri. The big surprise, the first major surprise for me, I thought Michigan was a lock for number 4 and Clemson was a lock for number 5. But they go Clemson at number 4, which was a pretty big surprise. Taking a look at Clemson's schedule, you know, the big knock on Michigan is the weak non-conference. Well, Clemson's non-conference up until this point has been very weak as well. Now, they face Notre Dame this week on the road, and that is a 100% respectable non-conference game. But you take a look at who they start with, Georgia Tech in a neutral site game, Furman, and Louisiana Tech. That is not a good non-conference start. The double overtime win against Wake Forest, I'm not very impressed by that. I understand Wake Forest is a top 25 team, but giving up 45 points is just simply not good. And that was supposed to be Clemson's strength, was their defense. Their win against NC State was solid. Boston College is really bad. FSU, okay, going on the road to FSU, that's not a layup. And that score was a lot more of a blowout than the score suggests. I believe it was 34-13 in the fourth quarter of that game, and then FSU scored 2 touchdowns. And then their home win over Syracuse, where they were losing, you know, throughout the entire first half, although they did have some really bad turnover luck. That looks a lot worse. And I think the main issue for Clemson is the quarterback situation right now. I would not have put Clemson over Michigan. I don't see enough big quality wins there. I mean, for Michigan, it's a very clear, horrible non-conference schedule. Colorado State, Hawaii. I guess UConn's been a little bit of a surprise. They might make a bowl. But overall, it's terrible. The Maryland game at home, Maryland's not a horrible team. And that game, you know, Maryland scored a late touchdown in it at Iowa. That's another game. Iowa scored a late touchdown. The Indiana game was a little worrisome for Michigan. That game was very close at halftime. And going into the fourth quarter, I believe it was a 1-score game. Of course, their major win against Penn State at home. I will say, I keep seeing Michigan fans say, well, Michigan crushed Penn State. Ohio State barely beat Penn State. Why is Michigan behind Ohio State? Number one, it's a complete false narrative because Ohio State played on the road in a hostile environment against Penn State. Penn State is a completely different team when they're at home with that crowd on their side. And then Michigan gets them at home, and Michigan fans want to compare those two games. It's just ridiculous. And then also you're looking at this schedule. I mean, it's a 1-score game with Indiana going into the fourth quarter. Do we really think under any circumstances Ohio State would be in a 1-score game with Indiana going into the fourth quarter, let alone all the ball control, the game control, the FPI, all of the metrics say Ohio State is better than Michigan? And then they beat Michigan State at home 29-7. That's a situation, again, where Ohio State goes to Michigan State. They could have won that game 76-0 if they wanted to. I mean, C.J. Stroud threw for like 400 yards in the first half, and we've got Michigan. I know it's a rivalry game, but we've got Michigan struggling in the red zone against Michigan State, kicking field goals. So, guys, you know, I think Michigan should be number 4, but I keep seeing these Michigan fans really create these false equivalencies, saying they should be ranked right next to or higher than Ohio State when it's just simply not true when you look at any metric. just simply not true. So they went with Clemson above Michigan. I don't agree with it. I guess it's due to Michigan's bad non-conference. Clemson will face Notre Dame, so their non-conference will improve greatly. They're only 4-point favorites. And this could be a situation where if Clemson beats Notre Dame, their resume will be clearly better than Michigan's. Because Michigan is facing Rutgers this week. So they'll get another quality win. The other team, of course, Alabama, one-loss Alabama being ranked above TCU. Guys, when I made my predictions on what I thought the committee was going to do, I said they were going to put one-loss Bama in front of TCU for a number of reasons. Number one, this has been a big pet peeve of mine. It's like we're treating TCU with kid gloves. Let's look at TCU's schedule. Number one, their non-conference schedule. Colorado is the worst Power 5 team by far in college football. They face an FCS school and then a road game with SMU, and you think SMU is decent. They only win that game 42-34. Could you imagine Alabama against SMU winning by 8 points? It's like we're using different standards. They crush Oklahoma. That was a great win. Dylan Gabriel was out the entire second half, but still, they scored like 28 points in the first quarter. That is a quality win. I will give them credit for that. But then you've got a game at Kansas where Kansas's starting quarterback gets injured. You win by 7 points. You're outgained by 100 yards. You give up over 500 yards of total offense. If you really want to be ranked high, we're going to have to do a deep dive and really address some of these significant defensive issues for TCU. The overtime 3-point win at home over Oklahoma State, a game in which Oklahoma State was leading the entire way. Oklahoma State turns around and loses 48-0 to Kansas State. You beat Kansas State at home 38-28. You were down 28-17 at halftime. Kansas State's starting quarterback gets injured, and you come back, and then at West Virginia, you give up 31 points in that game. So, guys, if you want to put TCU above Alabama, it is fine. I totally understand it, but I just think it's a situation where if you're combining all the factors and you're looking at all the metrics, people immediately want to play the victim. They want to say it's SEC bias, and trust me, I understand it. I only want one SEC team in the playoffs this year, guys. Trust me. But it looks like it's going to be another SEC cesspool, and I'm saying, when you look at Alabama, some of their wins, yes, they had the Texas game, but TCU's had a number of close games, and then you really want to punish Alabama for losing by 3 points in a game that they were winning to the committee's number one team in the nation on the road, Tennessee. So it's like that's their one loss. They lost to the number one team in the nation by 3 points in a game they controlled on the road. So that's why the committee's rationale does make sense in that sense, at least in my opinion. So just why is Alabama above TCU? It's a number of things, the metrics, things like that, and also TCU's defense. You've got Alabama. Alabama has an elite offensive unit. They have an elite defensive unit. TCU does not have an elite defensive unit. They're not a complete team right now. And then looking at LSU, so LSU surprisingly gets ranked at number 10. We look at their schedule. They had that fluky week 1 loss to FSU, but that's bad on the resume. Even a close win on a neutral site against FSU, not great for the resume. Missouri State, that was a good win for them. We'll give them credit. They barely beat Auburn on the road by 4 points. Is that a top 10 team? Auburn is a dumpster fire. They get annihilated by Tennessee. I know Tennessee is the number one team in the rankings according to the committee, but still, you beat Florida. You give up 35 points. That's not impressive. And then you did crush Ole Miss, who I think is overrated, but that is a good win. Should LSU, as a 2-loss team, with one of their losses being a blowout, be inside of the top 10? I don't think so. When I was doing my top 10 on my predictions, I didn't even think of putting LSU inside of the top 10. Not saying they're a horrible team, but I'm looking at this resume. You can say they should have won the FSU game, but still, that was a close game. It wasn't like one team was significantly better than the other. You've got the close win at Auburn, who's a dumpster fire. You score 21 points. You get annihilated in a game. You give up 35 points to Anthony Richardson and only win that game by 10. So, yeah, LSU, I think it was a little bit high. I understand the FPI really likes LSU, and that might have went into the committee's decision to rank them that high. And then the other thing I wanted to show, we do have some significant parity right now in the world of college football. 5 SEC teams ranked, 5 ACC teams ranked, 5 Pac-12 teams ranked, 4 Big Ten, and 4 Big 12. Now, all of the SEC teams are in the top 11. That's what people were talking about. And then, you're splitting hairs with some of these teams. Personally, I don't think NC State should be ranked. I think Syracuse is probably going to be unranked after this week. I think Oregon State is going to lose to Washington, so they're going to be unranked. And then another team that could get ranked from the Big Ten, I believe, is Maryland. If Maryland wins this week at Wisconsin, they will be ranked. They are like 4.5-point underdogs on the road, because Wisconsin really isn't that bad of a team. I know they've had a down year, but still they've got a really good running back. They're at home and they've got a good defense. That's a team that could potentially get ranked. And then from the American Conference, you've got Tulane coming in at number 19. It was interesting. Somebody made a note of this. Tulane is, I believe, 6 spots lower than Kansas State, but they beat Kansas State and they have less losses than Kansas State. But honestly, I understand it. Tulane's schedule is significantly worse than Kansas State. Kansas State is coming off a 48-0 win over a ranked team. So I understand it. I'm not one of these people that thinks the head-to-head is end-all be-all. I think there can be fluke games, like Tulane beating Kansas State on the road. But either way, just kind of cool to see the parity going around right now in college football. I do still view the situation with TCU as pretty cut and dry. If they win out, if they're undefeated, they're in the playoff. They'll be in. It'll all work itself out. And if they lose a single game, they're out no matter what. I would be shocked if a one-loss Big 12 team at this point would be in the playoff. If TCU loses, I think the Big 12 is out. Because you've got multiple SEC teams with chances. You have the situation with Michigan and Ohio State. And if I'm a Michigan fan, I'm a little bit worried because you're already ranking them below Clemson. What if Ohio State beats Michigan in like a 7-point game? Michigan is a 1-loss team. How does their resume look like? I will say it is very good for Michigan that Illinois keeps winning, because Michigan is going to need Illinois to be like a top 12 team when they face them. That's the second to last regular season game. That would be a key win for Michigan, who needs key wins because of their bad non-conference schedule. It's really going to weigh down their strength of schedule. And guys, if you don't know, if you schedule 3 really bad non-conference teams like Michigan did, your strength of schedule is going to get nuked. There's a difference between scheduling a team inside the top 40, a team inside the top 70 of the FPI, and then a team outside of the top 100. Michigan scheduled 3 teams outside of the top 100. So their strength of schedule is always going to be really bad this year. So they need key wins. And you have the issue where you have to go to Ohio State. You're going to be underdogs. You're going to be up against it. If you are able to hang in that game and you lose a close one, would you be in as a 1-loss team that doesn't make your conference championship? You would have key wins over Illinois. You would have key wins over Penn State, and you would have a close loss to Ohio State. So that's an interesting dynamic. But that's the one weird thing, because it depends what happens with Georgia. This is a very interesting thing developing. If Georgia loses this game, they might be out of the playoffs. And I know they're undefeated. They are so lucky that Oregon turned around their season, because their schedule is horrible. They don't face another team inside the top 25 after this Tennessee game. So if they lose to Tennessee at home, there's going to be a ton of Georgia fans saying they should be in the playoff. And really, their only argument would be a close loss to Tennessee if they lose a close game, and then that week 1 win over Oregon. They have no other good quality teams on their schedule. The SEC East It's a major issue right now. I do think they face Mississippi State, but if they beat Mississippi State's not going to be ranked. So that is something to take into consideration. Georgia, if they lose this game, depending on what happens, let's say Georgia loses this game, let's say Alabama beats Tennessee in the SEC Championship. Tennessee and Alabama are both in the playoff. Ohio State's in the playoff. Clemson's probably in the playoff. And then you're talking about a one-loss Georgia who doesn't even make their conference championship. You've also got the situation with TCU. So it is interesting to follow. But guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.